Whenever I think about the antagonists of Soos and the Wheel Goer when it came to Alex being regretful for killing Giffany because he really wanted to give her more development when it comes to how people really enjoyed Giffany from this episode alone. It's the anime God course, which, if it's a thing, then I'm pretty sure that this episode isn't the only episode that showcases fans enjoying an anime God to the point that they can look past their major flaws, which kind of sums up onto why Alex is really regretful for what he did in this episode by killing off Giffany. But then again, considering that he also doesn't want to do a third season, there is potential into having this character return in some other way. But then again, Soos doesn't deserve to be in a toxic relationship. Soos and the Wheel Goer centers around Soos trying to find a goal after her grandmother tells him that he needs to fall in love with somebody, considering that his cousin Reggie has an engagement party, and considering we don't get any information when it comes to Soos' cousin, isn't it weird that he is somewhat relatable like Wendy when it comes to not getting much development? If anything, the more I think about these ideals, it really makes it difficult to believe that a season 3, despite not gonna be happening regardless of what we do, is still debatable no matter how you think about it. But then again, considering of what I stated about Giffany earlier, this episode is also an example of some ideals not worth bringing back, considering that people really enjoyed Giffany in this episode despite being an antagonist. When Soos found a video game that people have been sending back to the video game store due to how dangerous it is, it's honestly no surprise that Soos would be in a scenario that showcases more chaos when it comes to Gravity Falls, and since this isn't the first time a video game character comes to life, when it came to the Fight Fighters episode that Dipper brought his favorite video game character to life. For me personally, I have no issue of this episode being an episode centering around Soos. I actually knew for a fact that there was at least going to be one episode centering around his character, and considering that in a few episodes later it showcases of how much he hates birthdays all because his dad didn't come to his birthday parties. Honestly, if someone is willing to spend some quality time with Soos in any other way in order to make him happy, I really feel like that with him playing a video game when it comes to talking to Giffany, I have to admit it's a possibility. Granted, I never played any of these types of video games, but I kinda understand what type of game it is when people are really invested in these types of games. And considering that that's the origins of where Giffany came from, you know, if those people were the fans of Giffany in the real world, and for some unknown reason the game somehow comes to life in the real world, I can only imagine of them being simping towards Giffany to the point that they just can't be able to resist. Or back then, during teenage years where they watched this episode, they can't get anime goers out of their head. If I did watch this episode when it aired, I may understand the appeal of Giffany having some form of redemption when it comes to being a better character when it comes to a backstory, but at the same time, considering that they actually gave Dipple's video game character backstory, even though that Dipple is only losing him to Scale Robbie, and he just ends up disappearing, well, not really disappearing, but mainly just gets defeated, and people just don't question about his character. I really feel like that if they have that perspective towards Giffany, if they're not into her character when it comes to her being attractive, I'm personally think that leaving her defeated or disappeared forever is honestly better compared to having Dipple getting beaten up with an ultra combo. Truth be told, I didn't find Giffany attractive, nor relatable. And if she did return in some other way, then I'm pretty sure she will probably haunt Soos in order to get what she wants. And considering that Soos manages to meet someone in the real world who understands him, the only solution of Giffany returning is to have Melody, the person that Soos is getting along with, while having a crush towards much more healthier compared to Giffany, is for her to face off Giffany. It's mainly a girl versus girl scenario, even though if we did had Wendy and shape-shifting Wendy happened episodes ago, but to tell you the truth, if Soos faced off Giffany, then it probably wouldn't be interesting. Granted, it does showcase of how much Soos has less interactions towards people in the mall, but at the same time, if you actually think that Giffany returning while not giving the fans what they wanted is considered terrible writing, I don't even think a hardcore fan of Giffany who is really passionate of Gravity Falls would make an episode would put her in a positive light rather than a negative light that we've seen in this episode. I'm not saying I did not enjoy this episode, because I rewatched this episode multiple times, and I have to admit that Soos getting confidence from Mabel and Dipple really makes me convinced that he is somewhat capable of getting the real goal rather than a goal that's from a video game. Considering of how unhealthy that is, it really shows that if Soos didn't had a goal in the real world, then I'm pretty sure that his character for most episodes in this show would have been comic relief, if anything. If it wasn't for this episode and the episode later on, when it comes to his birthday being the worst day of his life, well, not really worst day, but his most hated day of his life, then I would probably say for a fact that he would have been way more useless, and with him being the comic relief, it wouldn't aged better over time. Granted, people may enjoy his character, but without an episode centering around him, while he still found Romance Academy 7, but there's no episode centering around the character Giffany, then he would have had a huge derailment, because he will probably spend most of his life playing the video game, which, like I said, is not healthy, but for the life that he's in right now, I'm pretty sure that there is more of a reason onto why that he works at the Mystery Shack in the same ways as Wendy. If anything, I'm mostly surprised that his poor interaction is described as worse than Dipple, which is the words of what Maple said in this episode. Not to be critical, but every time I hear Maple saying that, it really gave me a headache, but also irritated, considering after making a 2-hour-long video centering around Dipple, Wendy, and Robbie, keep in mind that potential video centering around Mabel, it might happen towards the end of this year, but then again, I really need to put a lot of I really need to put so much focus onto why Mabel's character is just difficult for me to get into. Mainly the fact that with her being a comic relief just isn't the same as it was upon watching the show for the first time. And the fact that her hate him while going too overboard, I still can't be able to get into her character when it comes to relatability. But then again, we're getting off track. When it comes to the subplot centering around Grunkle Stan throwing away old Goldie, and then he sees an animatronic that really sells a lot of money. He really wants to buy it, but it's not for sale. So he attempts to go steal the animatronic, but since that Giffany is taking control of any machines, the animatronic comes to life. Goldie bites the animatronic, and this leads to the credits where Stan takes Goldie to Las Vegas. With this subplot being somewhat iconic, considering that Stan uses the same equipment over and over again, and then when he sees a bigger animatronic, if Giffany didn't control that animatronic, then I'm pretty sure we wouldn't be able to get another iconic moment from Stan in one of these episodes. And the iconic moment is him taking Goldie to Las Vegas, and then we see pictures of them going to Las Vegas. Knowing full well that Stan really spends most of his life at the Mystery Shack, it's really possible that he's more deranged compared to Soos and Wendy, because even though that they're not deranged, what makes them somewhat deranged is that Soos is barely into any interactions towards other people in his surroundings, while Wendy is literally keeping it together because she lives in a family that is beyond dysfunctional and way too unbearable to live in. The more I think about Wendy in this show, especially after making the 2-hour analysis centering around her, it's really difficult to consider her if you don't think about her when it comes to her issues, when the show itself isn't even bothering to take her character seriously in the same ways as they wouldn't even take Soos's character seriously if this episode never happened. Let's get into Soos's real girlfriend, Melody. Aside from the statement of me stating that she would have faced off Giffany in a possible episode, the way I see it, with her being mostly isolated from talking to other people, mainly boys, and vice versa with Soos when it comes to talking to girls, if we actually had an episode centering around her, her backstory would have been a lot more different in comparison to Soos, considering that when she ends up walking with Soos at the Mystery Shack in the finale, she would probably understand a lot more when it comes to the life that Soos has, while her life, while being somewhat similar to Soos, she isn't fully isolated when it comes to her interactions towards other people. Granted, she follows the plot, especially since that she is her own character, but considering that Giffany is attempting to murder her, I can't imagine what Soos would feel if she saw someone that he is growing a liking to, which is Melody, getting killed. Granted, it won't be the same reaction as Dipper's reaction when he thought Wendy is killed, but at the same time, he will probably have some kind of emotion, judging the fact that whenever he is mad or sad, his character really improves whenever he showcases emotions. Granted, Wendy can do that, but considering the poor direction that she has, it's kind of difficult to see her better than Soos in these scenarios. Whenever whenever you see Soos in the predicament that he's just trying to make things right for not only for himself, but also for the goal that Giffany is attempting to model. And judging the fact that Giffany told Soos that every girl shuts him out, honestly, it's more of a reason onto why I'm not attracted to her nor find her relatable. Because if Alex really wants to make her character a lot more better than writing her this way, then I'm pretty sure that they're gonna attempt to make her come to life from a video game while pushing aside melody completely. What I mean is give her a Gravity Falls character design than an anime character design, but you can keep the hair if it's somewhat possible. If you still find Giffany enjoyable but also sympathetic somehow, then I can't stop you, but at the same time, I'm not gonna be able to enjoy your character, especially since that I'm not really into video games like I used to, and if I did, I still wouldn't be able to spend nights on playing Romance Academy 7 to the point that her would be worthwhile, because she really isn't worthwhile. Even if other attractive characters are in a game that I found attractive, I still wouldn't be able to play a game because, to be perfectly real, there are still better options to play video games than playing a romance simulator. It would have been something cool if I played it back then, but I would have outgrown it. But that's just me though. This is the most underrated when it comes to Season 2, and one of the best to showcase Soos' character, all the while increasing his character development. Like I said, if he didn't get this episode but still play the game, then it would have been a disservice and a derailment of his character. The more I look into these things, the more I realize that with some episodes that should have happened, mainly Wendy's development, this episode would have been the equivalent if Wendy was in Soos' position, if she actually is into romance simulation, but that would have been a little out of character for her. But that's just me though. I'm giving this episode a 7.75 out of 10.